Okay, this video is going to take us through a discussion about the indefinite loops. Before we start talking about indefinite loops, just to remind you about while or definite loops, they have a situation where we talked about how you have the loop control variable inside the Boolean expression, and the loop control variable has been, of course, declared and initialized. And then it's so it's initialized here, and then it's tested in the Boolean expression. If the Boolean expression is true, it executes the loop, and then the loop control variable has to be updated. And so with this, you can see that in a definite loop, we know the programmer decides, okay, I want this to run a certain number of times. In this case, this particular case, it's going to start at 0, go through the loop, and then 1, and then it'll go to 2 because it's incrementing because of this, 4, and then 5, and then at 6 the loop will stop. So it'll actually go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times through the loop. So the programmer decides, I want it to go through this definitely how much or how many times it's going to iterate. So it's predetermined. It's predetermined by the programmer. Now what we're doing here is we're going to look at some notes about an indefinite. Now, by the way, before I forgot about this, is that this is called a definite loops are called counter-controlled. In other words, they're controlled by the fact that you have a variable that's being counting, in this case by ones, and eventually it gets to a certain amount that will cause the loop to stop. So it's called a counter-controlled loop, is a definite one. Now, but as we look at an indefinite, then this is what we're looking at. Is that, and this is something you need to write down, an indefinite loop is called a user-defined or an event-controlled loop. So the user can affect how many times the loop will iterate, and the programmer will not know when the user decides to stop the loop. So it's indefinite. There's not a definite pre-planned, predetermined number of times it's going to be iterating. Also, an event-controlled loop is what it's called too, because a certain event happens that causes the loop to stop, and something like that. Again, the programmer doesn't know when that's going to happen, so it's not predetermined. It depends, and it's depending upon an event or upon the user. Now, the number of iteration depends on, there's two things that we're going to discuss. And so one is the occurrence of a particular event. So the first one is the occurrence of a particular event. And so let's take a look at the packet that we got. And in B, it's an indefinite while loop controlled by an accumulating variable. Now, when you're dealing with indefinite, you still have loop control variables, and they still are in 3 positions. And so, you look right at the Boolean expression, and you can tell this is the only variable in the Boolean expression. So, total value is the loop control value, or variable. And so, total value is declared and assigned here. It's tested in the Boolean expression, and it's updated on line 17. Alright, so this is where total value, the memory location that has been declared, total value, will then will be a certain amount, then it'll update and become another one, then it'll update and become another amount. So in this case, you can see it's going to be increasing. Now, what happens here then is what's going to cause the loop to stop. So the total value, of course, of this is the where they're picking up cards and they're entering their card value, and then the total value of the running total is kept track of. So the total value, of course, starts at 0, and obviously 0 is less than 40, so it jumps into the loop and a card is picked, and then total value gets increased, and then you go up to the loop and start again, and whatever that value is, maybe it's 7, it's still less than 40, and it just keeps on increasing, and eventually it gets to 38, and then when it gets to 40, 40 or higher, it causes the Boolean expression to be false. So the loop stops, and so it is controlled then by an event, and that event, in this case, the event is when total value, that variable has a value of 40 or more. That's the event that controls the loop. Alright, so that's one way that this happens. So an event is going to be based on some kind of a Boolean expression, things being greater than, less than, things being equal to each other. Just different types of things can happen. If we then go to the next thing, we see then that another thing that we can discuss here with indefinite loops is that the number of iteration depends on the decision of the user to continue or to stop the loop. So this is another thing that is going to look a little bit different, that have some similarities to the occurrence of a particular event, because the event is that the user says, I want to stop. But anyways, the decision of the user to continue or stop directly, and that is another way that you can write indefinite loops. And so we'll look at that in our example. Let's go down to the next page, and we have indefinite loops controlled by user choice. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind here. Again, first of all, the loop control variable is right in here in the Boolean expression as usual. And so there's 3 places it needs to be, 2 other places besides the Boolean expression where it's tested. It's got to be declared and initialized, and so here it is. Here it's tested, and then user choice needs to be updated, which is right here. And so the idea here is that you set the user choice to be a specific number that's going to make this Boolean expression true. So let's say we choose 1. So we've assigned user choice to be 1, and as long as user choice remains being 1, then the loop will iterate. So 1 is equal to 1, and so we go on and do the things here, and then the user is prompted to make a choice. And so here it says enter 1 to continue or another number to stop. And so they type their answers. Let's say type a 1, and then this line of course reads it and then stores that value here in user choice. Now so here it just replaces the 1 with another 1, so it's just 1, still 1. And so we go back up here, 1 is equal to 1, and then we go through the loop again. Let's say the user says, yeah, I want to continue, so I'm going to type a 1, so it types another 1. And so when it goes back up here, user choice is still 1. Well, eventually the user decides to stop, so maybe they'll type a 2 instead. So this line reads the 2 and then stores it in user choice, and so now you have a 2 in here, and we go up to the while statement, and in the Boolean expression 2 is not equal to 1, so the loop is stopped, and then it kicks out of the loop. And that's because the user chose specifically to stop. Alright, so that is indefinite loop ways to do that. And this should help you for tonight's homework.